everybody, welcome to this week's episode. I hope you have enjoyed this month's series on ready to wear, basically how to just go through the steps of creating a ready to wear collection. I know last week was very technical, so this week will be a bit more practical. You still need to do all that technical stuff to do what I'm going to show you this week. So let's get to it and welcome. I hope you caught up with last week's video, which I know was very technical. I'm sure some of that information was brand new to a lot of you, but the information is available, so never feel like you're stuck. I did link up a lot of resources of where I got some of that information, but I have learned a lot of that information as well in various trainings I've done. I think I mentioned in my resources video She Trades, and the beauty of She Trades is because they have courses and trainings that are specifically very fashion based. You do learn things like that in great detail, and they have online courses where you can do the course online and get even certificates. They give certifications, and basically that information is very, very useful, especially if you want to get into export. So in this week's video, I am going to get more into production. Whether you want to get into made to measure or you want to do the mass production for your ready to wear, I'm going to highlight that now, but my main video will be basically the process you'd have to take to talk to a factory if you want to outsource your production. Because if you're doing it in-house, it's about you coming up with the steps. But I'm sure the tips I'll share today will be useful for you if you are doing the things in-house. Maybe it's some things you need to consider even for your own in-house production, or if you decide to outsource, if people decide to outsource their production to you, because I know that happens a lot. Some designers have a lot of tailors, and some designers need help with mass production and don't want to go to a production facility. They want to go to someone who basically might be a bit more lenient with pricing, or might understand a designer's perspective, or might be a bit more gracious with timelines, and also maybe it just helps their business out. Maybe they are on a low season and they decided they're going to outsource some of their services. So these things do happen, and sometimes it's good to know the questions you should ask, because I know people have ended up getting into arguments and all that just because there was misunderstandings. If possible, write all these points down. I'm going to do it in slide form that I usually do with voiceover, so please do write down contracts when you're dealing with production facilities to protect yourself and also to protect them. If they don't have, at least you have for yourself to protect yourself, so there's no misunderstanding. Don't forget the tech packs. I know all those technical stuff was there, but you can buy templates online, as I had mentioned, and you can use those if you don't want to do every single thing from scratch. So so in this episode I am going to get into explaining a bit more about made to measure and ready to wear mass production. So let's begin. I won't dwell too much on made to measure because the whole series is about mass production and getting your ready to wear collection up and running. But made to measure is the most popular method of operating your fashion business in Kenya. Basically what happens is clients come in with a design in mind and it's made by a tailor or a designer who decides to modify it and all that. The price ranges really do depend on the technicality of the design. So most people will get designs from the internet and look for someone who can make it for them. The truth is that not everybody who sews is good at sewing everything. So my advice has always been, if you want trousers, go to someone who's good at making trousers. If you want dresses, go to someone who's good at making dresses. If you want shorts, tops and all that, so someone who makes dresses might not have a very big problem making tops and stuff like that, but it's good to know the skill level of the person you want the specific thing made. And the thing about Kenya, I will talk specifically about Kenya, I know it happens in other countries as well, is that people don't really do that homework. They sew a nice dress you made for someone on their wedding and they assume you can make everything, and it's not true. You can almost tell, if you really research well, that if a person likes making suits, you'll find that majority of the work they do is suits naturally, even if they don't have an order. So it's always important to just give work specifically to the specialization of the person you are going to. So I will not lie, I have made very many things. I've had things made for clients that were not my specialty. At that time I had a tailor who could do some of those things, but for me, dresses, corsets, fancy dresses, things with a lot of details, that's just my strength. So yes, we do learn everything in fashion school, but the truth is there's always something you just know how to do better than other things. So there is that method, and the other method that people do, people who want to control more of what they make, or control the kind of clients they get, is there are people who actually just do a collection and then let the clients choose from the collection, and the outfit is made to fit them. So that's still made to measure. It's supposed to be a bit less costly because the fabric probably has been bought in bulk, and the reason why the first option is usually very pricey is because you buy fabrics one-on-one. Okay, the thing about production generally is that the more you buy of the quantities, the bigger the quantities, the cheaper production is supposed to get, because of the unit cost and all that. So anyway, so this method is cheaper, but sometimes still more expensive than doing mass production, because there are some clients who will use more fabric, some will use less fabric, some will want a detail changed. Maybe they don't like the red buttons and they want them to be blue, things like that. So you have to consider some of those things. So made to measure is very specialized, made to measure is very expensive. And as much as people usually like comparing, oh, these designers in Kenya are so expensive, they should be as cheap as second-hand clothes, you really can't compare an outfit that was mass produced and then worn and then resold to be worn again. It doesn't make sense. So that's all I'm going to say about made to measure for now. If you ever want me to go deeper into made to measure, I'm willing to do a series for that, but now we're going to get into ready to wear. So with ready to wear, the truth is that you probably need a big infusion of capital to be able to make it possible. It needs a lot of money because you will have to buy materials in bulk, and that doesn't cost little money, it costs a lot of money. And apart from buying materials, you need to hire a factory or hire tailors. I know people who hire tailors on a temporary basis to produce certain run of clothes, and then after that they try and sell them and proceed from there instead of hiring them permanently. So you can do that, or you can outsource to a factory, or you can hire me to consult for you for your first production before you invest a lot of money into production. But yeah, so ready to wear is expensive. Before you even settle on how much you're going to sell an outfit for, my suggestion is always start with one design you're very sure of, and maybe if you are smart, maybe that design can have a variation. Maybe you play around with the color of the fabric, or maybe have it only in 2 colors, or maybe have a dress and a top version of the dress. I don't know. By the time you are coming up with a design, by the time you've done your tech pack, by the time you've bought fabric, you probably have done all that because you know there are people who are interested in buying the outfit. So the thing about ready to wear in Kenya is, because a lot of people are now starting to get more into the ready to wear space, I have noticed a trend about plain fabrics. Plain fabrics are easier to sell in Kenya if your outfit is made out of plain fabrics. This is just a tip I'm giving you. It's easier because Kenyans, we have a culture, we don't like uniform, so to speak. We don't like looking like someone else. So if you use print, and the print is just too much in the market, people call it Kenya uniform, and people do not like uniforms in Kenya. People like individualized style, but conservative individualized style. So my advice is generally just check what is selling well in ready-to-wear space before you get into it. There's a lot of research in ready-to-wear as well, because you also don't want to mass produce something that you don't know if it will sell. There's so much risk in ready-to-wear. It can be very scary, but you'll never know if you don't do it. My advice would be, if you are going to start into ready-to-wear and you're not very sure, I would suggest you do the second method I had mentioned about the made to measure, where you do a collection and let people order. Then you will be able to know what is moving, and from knowing what is moving you can decide to make a few more pieces of that, instead of investing a lot of money on a whole production run and then you're sitting with your clothes wondering why you're not selling. That would be my advice. So I'm going to get into the process of talking with a factory, because there are so many aspects of talking to a factory, or things you need to think about when you are creating a ready-to-wear. One of the most important ones is sizes, because you're not going to just make one. Even if you decide it's a blue dress, you're not going to make one blue dress in one size and decide, unless you're doing a size inclusive collection, which most of the time is not so inclusive. People are different. So one thing you should note is size charts are not universal. A lot of size charts that you find on the internet, let's say you're buying clothes from the UK, you'll find a lot of the size charts are similar with a few variations, because those measurements come from the sample people whose measurements were taken either from online data, because they keep buying clothes from certain websites, or from just history of the country and the sizes that usually sell well. So do not think that just because there's a size 14 UK, and that size 14 UK, maybe you buy size 14 China, or you buy from Australia or something like that. Sizes are different. Designers do adjust their sizes according to the clients that usually buy from them. So if I do size 14 UK, considering most people there are Caucasian, and then I come and bring it in Kenya, chances are our waist to hip ratio is very different from people who are native to the UK. So there are some adjustments I would make to accommodate the Kenyan client. So please understand that size charts are not universal and they are not identical. You can borrow the standardization of the sizes because it's more familiar, especially for us. UK sizing is more familiar, I guess, because of colonization and the fact that also in fashion school we use UK books. But I tend to put measurements on my size charts so that people can understand maybe the range that they should be thinking when they are getting the outfits. And I do make my patterns with Kenyans in mind, because primarily if I'm selling on a website or I'm selling in a shop that is based here, it makes sense that my sample clothes or my clothes are for the measurements of the people who live in Kenya. If I was exporting, then I would readjust the sizing. So please keep that in mind. Even when you're working with a factory, you have to probably get into the details of those sizing, because if you're going to make let's say you're selling in China where most people are petite, you might have to make maybe extra small, extra small, maybe up to medium. Maybe those are your sizes that would do well there. But the same sizes here in Kenya would not do well because most of us are very curvy. So maybe you'd have to go a bit wider, and maybe also think about dimensions. There's some groups of people that have longer torsos, some have longer legs, some have just the perfect balance. One thing I'll tell you about Kenyans that I've noticed for making clothes very long is, for us women, we add weight on our arms. Not everybody, but a lot of us add weight on our arms. Another thing I noticed is our rib cages, especially under our bust, is usually smaller than for my European clients, and I've noticed that rib cages are a bit wider. That I noticed as well. So there are various things like that. Of course, everybody is different, and for some people they might be the exception, but that's just for the average Kenyan. So of course there's so many things you have to consider: the research, what will sell, culture of the country, what people usually wear if they are buying new clothes, price ranges, what people are willing to spend. Yeah, so there's all that. So I hope this is helpful, and I hope that when I do the slides now to get into the things you should discuss when you're outsourcing, whether you decide to outsource in Kenya or you decide to outsource out there, I hope these next points will be helpful. They are not specifically my point. I got some of them from research, and I'm sure it's not all I've not exhausted the whole list. So anything you think I've left out, feel free to write it in the comment section, and let's proceed. So we are going to go through some of the production questions you should have in mind when you're approaching a factory or a production facility that you want to work with. One of the most basic questions is to ask them what is the main product that they make, because the factories, most of them actually specialize in specific products. So don't assume that because you want clothes made from chiffon and you go to a factory that makes cotton that they'll be able to handle your fabric. They even buy machines that specialize in whatever it is they specialize in. So don't forget to ask that. The other part of this is asking them if they're an agency, especially if you're dealing with a factory that's abroad. Most of the time you find that you might have to go through a go-between. There are some companies that do this so that they don't have to handle the ethical and the just basically pollution and all those things directly. If they work through an agency, then it's kind of like a loophole for some brands. But yeah, it's also important to just know this information and see if you're okay with it. If you are manufacturing overseas, then the language that's primarily used is very important, because let's say you are manufacturing in China, then you might find that you need a translator. So it's important to know the language that is used with the factory. Maybe if they use English, then you're good, because sometimes this can even affect your tech packs. Maybe you have to translate them so that they can understand what they're doing and all that. So do keep in mind the language. If possible for you to visit the factory, then it would be good to visit, check how the workers are treated, check if they have the machines you need for what they're producing, because sometimes factories might tell you they have the machines and they outsource and they put that in your price. So it's very important to check this as well. Most factories don't like this question, especially if you're a small brand and they want to maximize their production. The minimum quantity is always important to know what the minimum is, because every factory has a minimum quantity, because for them the numbers have to make sense, because they're making money off of every single unit that they produce. So you find that a lot of them have very large quantities. I think one of the bigger factories I had spoken to that apparently is one of the small ones that do export was actually asking for 10,000 minimum for one design per size, and others do millions and all that. So it's very important to just understand the factory. There are factories that do smaller runs, but you'll find that the production cost ends up being a bit higher if your quantities are fewer, and they become a bit cheaper if your quantities are more. So these are things you need to really understand when you're sourcing for production. Sourcing for fabric as well is something that you can decide to do yourself, or you can work with the relationships the factory has with their fabric suppliers. Maybe they usually get them at a cheaper price. Example, because you have bothered to figure out the fabrics they are used to working with, you might find that they have good deals overseas, maybe with some of the trade agreements that I will mention at the end of these slides. Maybe the trade agreements, and they get discounts, so they don't have to pay certain taxes. So you might find that factory bringing in the things might be cheaper than you trying to source them yourself. So it's good to weigh those options and still ask just in case. Then also it's important to know what the cost of production entails, because sometimes you find that a factory might not give you all the breakdown. There are some that will, there are some that won't. So it's important to know what you're paying for, what it includes, how you're going to receive the item at the end. And if you are producing overseas, if the cost includes delivering it to you. So it's important to know what it entails, all the costs. It's also important to discuss how you will pay. I'm assuming most factories probably work with checks because it's very official. I really doubt you can pay with a card or anything like that, but I don't know. I guess it also depends on the production run you're doing. I have worked with smaller manufacturing companies in Kenya, and they do allow MPESA, that's mobile money. But I think checks are the most popular means of payment. Production timeline is also very important, and always start with a sample. Check sample, correct sample, review samples before you get into the big manufacturing production part. Samples are very important just so that you make sure that it is exactly the way you want and corrections are made at that time. And please note that samples are more expensive. They tend to cost more than the big production run. So always insist on a sample, especially if you're manufacturing overseas. Have it shipped to you, check issues, check changes, note them, and then give the factory feedback. Please do not skip this process. It's one of the most important ones. Another thing you need to consider is their claims. If there's a claim, if there's an issue with the production process or the product or anything like that, you need to know how the factory handles it, what usually happens, or will you end up with lawyers or things like that. So just make sure that you understand what would happen if an issue arises. Maybe the factory, something happens to the factory and they can't work. So what happens? Do they pay you back? Will they be able to finish your manufacturing? If they can't be able to continue producing for you, do you have to look for someone else to start the process again? Like, there's so many things that can happen that you don't know. So it's very important to have this written down and understood. Lastly, of course, it's always good to check references, always good to check who they've worked with before, check the quality of the products they've worked with, talk to them if you can, and then see if it's worth proceeding. So I hope this list has helped you see the importance of basically having this as a discussion as you approach a factory. So I decided to point out also some of the trade agreements that may affect you if you are producing or shipping to another country to sell. There are different trade agreements. I'm not going to get into all of them. I just named them here so that you could actually research them further. Some may not even apply in the fashion industry. I just put them here because I didn't want to make this video too long by checking, but I'm sure most of them probably apply one way or another, whether or not we are benefiting as Kenyans or people abroad are benefiting. So do check these out and see what you can do with this information for yourself. 10 ethical fashion certifications you should know about. This has come up a lot because of how unethical the fashion industry has been over the years. So these are basically certifications that just help guide the fashion industry, especially production process, into meeting ethical standards and ensuring that the environment is safe and people are safe and people are paid well as well. So this is just a list of some of them. I'm sure I have not exhausted all of them, but this is what I got from this specific site. So do have a look, check them out, learn more about them. It might actually affect something you're producing and you want to export, or maybe just something you're producing and might be banned later, because you know sometimes a certain metal is banned or a certain fabric is banned because it's doing something to the environment and things like that. So do check them out. So hopefully you found the list helpful and it has empowered you now if you decide to visit a factory. Maybe some of the questions you could have, maybe you've come up with some other questions that I did not put on the list. I have visited a couple of factories here in Kenya, courtesy of being part of some training, and I visited one that does clothes even for export, and I learned that some of those factories actually need certain certifications because some countries have very specific things they allow in their country. Like there are some countries that don't allow certain materials. Some certifications that factories get actually help with reducing taxes. Example, one of the most popular ones, that famous ones that a lot of factories here in Kenya do, especially if they export into the US, it's called AGOA, Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, which is an agreement between Kenya and US for some certain goods to be tax exempt when they reach the US border. So there's some factories who get that certification. You have to go to, I guess, Ministry of Trade to get some of the certification. Getting the certification is also a process. There are some people who want other certifications for standardization. Like when I did a training for that was basically facilitated by a government agency, and they for you to work with them if they are going to take you on one of their export trips, is that you must have an international barcode, because actually there are people who give you access to international barcodes, and then you also must have KEBS certification, which is a Kenya standardization certification. Personally, I don't see the need for that for clothes, but it's something that they insist you have to do. So there are very many other steps outside of everything I have said this last month. So just know that when you're getting into export or when you're getting into ready to wear, it is a long process. You have to give yourself time. Especially if you're doing your first run, don't give it a short period of time. Give it a good amount of time where you do not miss any steps, and you don't have you don't end up losing so much money because you are in a hurry to just produce and get on with it. I personally would advise you to take a year to really think through the process and really take your time. And especially if you want to get into export, give yourself even more time, but always consider having a local market first before branching out and selling out there, because sometimes it helps you to also have a home base, and also just so that local people can enjoy your product. So I would suggest mostly spend a lot of time with the product, refining it, making sure it meets global standards. Even if people in your country do not care for global standards, try and make sure your product meets global standards. And also just take your time, especially with the sample process. I know people like to skip sample process. Sample process is very important because you actually end up making some changes in the sample process. So I would advise that if you must, do take your time with the sample process. So thank you so much for watching to the end. I hope you found all this very informative, and if you have any questions, please reach out in the comment section. I will respond, and I guess I'll see you next month with a new series. Don't forget to watch all the others. Welcome new subscribers. Like, share, and subscribe, and see you next week. Bye!